This podcast episode was made possible in part with support from Sacred Rights, a project funded by the Henry Luce Foundation and the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation and hosted by Northeastern University. Sacred Rights is a project that supports public scholarship on religion and provides resources and networks for scholars of religion committed to translating the significance of their research to a broader audience. I recommend you learn more about Sacred Rights on their website at sacred-rights.org or find Sacred Rights on Twitter at sacred_rights. Welcome to Classical Ideas. This is Greg Soden, and this is a podcast where, since 2017, I discuss all things religion with a variety of fantastic scholars, experts, authors, and educators. On this episode, I talked to Arwa Hussain about public scholarship in religion, the Dawoodi Bohras Muslim community in Montreal, her work with Sacred Rights, and the complexity of being an academic who researches within one's own community. Arwa Hussain is a PhD candidate in religions and cultures and the 2022-2023 public scholar at Concordia University in Montreal. Her current research interests deal with Islamic communities, particularly her own community, the Dawoodi Bohras, gender and agency, and social media platforms. Arwa holds an MA and MPhil degree in history from the University of Karachi, Pakistan. As a Concordia public scholar, Arwa has produced a number of pieces of public scholarship, including for the Montreal Gazette, The Conversation, and the Concordia blogs, a lot of which we discuss on this episode. You can follow her work on Twitter at Arwa Hussain PhD. Thank you so much for listening. Arwa Hussain, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Hi, how are you doing?
Excellent, thank you. So, Arwa, I'm just wondering if you can spend a moment and introduce yourself a little bit to the audience out there so they know a little bit about who you are and what you do.
So my name is Arwa Hussain. I am currently a PhD candidate at Concordia University in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. And I was also a Concordia Public Scholar for 2023 and a Sacred Rights Fellow for their 2023 Gender Carpenter cohort. And yeah, I'm also a mother.
Wonderful. Well, I'm a father, so it's nice to have a co-parent here with you. Well, Arwa, I want to know a little bit about your life and your backstory, because how you became a scholar of religion. I want to know a little bit about the pathway that led you into your areas of interest that led you to where you are in your profession today. Tell me a little bit about some of those major turning points in your life.
You know, I had no intention of being a scholar of religion or really like talking about the things that I do right now, or even doing the research that I do. I was very confused when I went into university, and for my undergraduate, which I did in Pakistan, where I'm from originally, I chose to go into history. And that was just purely out of interest, because I used to love reading about the pyramids and the pharaohs. And
Yeah.
I had dreams of being an Egyptologist. But in Pakistan and in the general environment, you don't study the social sciences. You especially do not study history, because who studies history? Like, it's the most boring thing in the world, which I've heard all of my career. But I really loved it. I enjoyed my professors, and I found great mentors in that department. I discovered that I had a flair for doing research. I really enjoyed doing research, and that's how I kind of, decided to then do a master's in South Asian history, where I focused on how fiction can be used to because yeah, like I said, everybody thinks of history as a very, very boring subject. So I I explored how fiction can inspire children to be interested in history. Then kind of I had a transition where I was looking at academia and research as a career. And one of the things that I really wanted to do was research, contribute to research on my community. So I belong to the Dawoodi Bohra community, which is a very small Muslim sect that lives basically all over the world. And there's very little been researched and talked about. And there was another aim with this too. When I wanted to do research and when I was thinking of what to do with my life, basically, one of the things that my mother told me, which also comes from a very beloved leader of my community, was this quote that I want to share. This was like, the faithful must strive for success in both worlds. They must combine knowledge that ensures fulfillment in this world with knowledge that secures prosperity in the hereafter. So this was kind of became a guiding path for my life, where I wanted to use my skills, my interests to benefit my community and for it to have purpose for me in ways. And so that is how I kind of decided to, when I applied for a PhD, I wanted to contribute to research on the women of my community.
Yeah.
And that's how I came to my supervisor and my department at Concordia, who really encouraged me. And they said, basically, you come here, you will, if you want to do your PhD here, the department has, support and funding. And so that's how I kind of ended up doing this PhD. It kind of widened up to being, a Muslim woman living in Quebec, in Canada, and how that kind of played into my experiences and eventually made its way into my research and my public scholarship.
What's really interesting to me too is the fact that you wanted to originally be an Egyptologist, so people who are long dead. And then so you went from people who are so long dead to people who are a part of your actual community that you're like embedded in every single day of your life. So that's a really interesting contrast between talking about people who died thousands of years ago versus people that you walk amongst as community members every day. Have you ever thought about that?
Oh no, I haven't, honestly. Because I didn't see the kind of context I grew up in and the things that we studied, it mostly in history, especially since I was in history, we didn't really look at the contemporary world that much. The idea that you can study contemporary societies and peoples and what they're doing wasn't really a part of that education. So it was always like about the past and what has happened in the past. And then, yeah, I came to it by the way of fiction, right? So historical fiction was my kind of introduction into that. And that was always with dealing with Egypt and in this valley and those ancient cultures. So I've never really thought about it.
Yeah, no, it really just was making me chuckle thinking about
Yes.
how would you describe yourself and like your research agenda today? Like, where do you situate yourself as a scholar, like right now?
That's a tough one for me. For one, like as public scholars and having done a lot of public scholarship, we're always told to think of ourselves as experts.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess in some ways I am an expert on my community, at least from an academic point of view. But from within the community, I feel like a very novice scholar just because I haven't studied a lot in terms of the theology of it all. I'm mainly looking at, contemporary experiences of these women and this society and what happens there. So there's that kind of disjunction for me a little bit there. And yeah, I guess I'm just a student trying to learn as much as I can and contribute to this knowledge of my community at this point also, like both in terms of academic knowledge and then public scholarship as well.
Yeah, I love the idea of thinking about, am I an expert in the theology and the traditions of a community versus am I documenting people's stories and experiences? Because those are very different approaches to education and expertise. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes, no, I think because, my community is really big on education,
Hmm.
especially in terms of, a lot of the people go to, there's not only does our community have smaller like madrasas that start from, from when the kids are 5 years old to teach them about basic religious concepts and teach them different things about about our history, about our faith, about the different practices and the different prayers in Islam that is there. But it also goes, my community has its own university system, basically, where children from the community who go there at 11, 12 years of age, they study theology and those texts very deeply. Or my own mother graduated from this university and she studied there for almost 11 years. And
Hmm.
so those people are someone who I consider as experts on the theological side of it. And I had my only, I just want to like add here that my aim when I was younger was to go to this university. I had no other ambitions other than this. When I couldn't get in, I think one of the ways I coped with that was to pick this path instead, where I'm kind of looking at it from a different angle.
And you do already an impressive amount of public scholarship. When I was looking into your work, I was finding stuff left and right. You've got stuff on, researching within your own community. You've got stuff about Montreal. You've got stuff about social media. And so I was like, oh, wow, this is so great because I have so much to read immediately from your work. So I want to talk about a couple of your pieces, if that's okay with you. You wrote an article in the Montreal Gazette that I really loved. I read it on a plane coming from
Okay.
St. Louis to back to Buffalo last weekend. And it's called A Place of Sharing and Solace for Montreal's Dawoodi Bohras. I love this piece, and I'm wondering to start off if you can tell me a little bit about the demographics of Dawoodi Bohras in Montreal, like in your home community.
So the Montreal community is very, very small. Like I think it's one of the very small centers of our community. We barely have, I think at this point, 15 to 20 families.
Hmm.
And then it's a lot of students who come here to study in Montreal, like myself, but I'm with a family too, so I kind of come between those two categories. And we have our own community center here. Overall, the community is like much larger, like it has almost 1 million members, and I think Toronto and Mississauga have much bigger
Oh,
centers. I myself like am originally from Karachi, and Karachi has one of the largest population of Dawoodi Bohras. So that was a stark difference for me.
have you been and visited any of the communities in Mississauga or Toronto? Because I actually just drove through both of those towns 2 days ago. And so it's really fascinating to hear both of those listed because I was just there.
I haven't been to the mosques there. We do have friends there, and I think I'll go first time to the mosque in Toronto, end of June. I'm going there.
Wonderful. Very cool. Well, welcome to the Lake Ontario, Lake Erie region for whenever you get here. I live in Buffalo, so I just live 2 hours away from Toronto. I love that. What are some of your favorite things about the community in Montreal that you're living in? Because the article was so wonderful talking about the supportive community aspects that are going on in Montreal. Tell me a little bit about some of the things that you love about the community there.
Yeah, so just because it's so small, everybody knows everyone else. And when for us in general, more as a community for the Boras, when you're going someplace, you generally first point of contact is finding other Dawoodi Bohras because you know if there's a community center, there will be someone there. And most often than not, people like very readily offer help. For me, in this case, was someone found me an apartment before I even moved to Montreal, and they did not know us at all. For me, that kind of, people know each other, they help out each other, you have someone to rely on. And then at the community center, it's a very familial atmosphere where, people catch up and come together during major incidents. And it was especially one of the reasons I wrote this year was it was very remarkable, especially after COVID, right? 2 years, everybody was more or less praying at home. And our community is one that comes together on a lot of different occasions. And we have a lot of like religious social events that take place at the community center. Yeah, that was something that was remarkable for me in the Montreal Center. And it's like a one big huge family there.
So, I'm curious about some of the specific differences in the school of thought for Dawoodi Boris compared to like Islam as like a larger whole. And I'm wondering what makes this community a little different that makes it, a standalone community within Islam as a larger religion.
So this is based on the beliefs and especially belief in the Imam. Uh, the basic like pillars of Islam are the same: prayers, fasting, Hajj. Those are all we share with other Muslims. But one of the very distinct things that differentiates the community is belief in the Imam. And the Imam is believed to be a direct descendant of the Holy Prophet Muhammad through his daughter's line, right? So it's not like a patrilineal succession, it's through his daughter Fatima and her son Hussein, and then his descendants. So it's based on a lot of esoteric texts and knowledge that is, and we consider that the Imam is the rightful heir and he is the sole successor of Islam. And so the imamate continued up until the Fatimid dynasty, from which, we trace a lot of our heritage to. And once the last imam, because he was very young and he was no longer able to stay in this world due to kind of persecution, that is when the imams formed their representatives who are called as the da'is. And the da'is are the head of the community. Right now, we have the 53rd da'i, and he is the central figure and spiritual leader of the community. One of the things that makes this community very distinct and why they have, we have our distinct kind of culture, our own mosques, our own kind of gathering is because of the figure of the da'i, because you have to believe in the da'i, and without him, no one can lead the prayers or the congregations, which is very different from other Muslim communities, right? Where anybody can lead prayers in the mosque if you want to. And so it revolves a lot around that. And there are hierarchies and institution, and it's institutionalized. And the community has largely kept to itself also for a very long period of time as a form of protection And even like at a time, especially when it moved, the center of the community moved to India, and during colonial times and when Muslims were being persecuted, it was a form of protecting the community by forming a distinct identity separate from other Muslims.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much for that little primer. That actually really helps me as well because I'm learning about the community really for the first time by reading your work and talking to you. So, I love talking about things on the podcast that I've never talked about before in the 6 years that I've been doing this show. So, thank you so much for filling in a little blind spot there in the show. You wrote another piece that was really fascinating to me called Conducting Research Within One's Own Religious Community. And this seems extremely important because I would imagine that there is a lot of trust that has to be built, a lot of conversations that has to happen between a researcher who is a part of the community and other people within the community. I'm wondering if you can just reflect a little bit on the challenges and the pleasures of researching within one's own community. Tell me your thoughts on that.
Oh, definitely. It is at a it occupies a very central place in my whole research project, in everything I talk about, basically, right? Because there are so many small considerations, tensions at the same time. Like I said, grappling with, because there's esoteric knowledges, and stuff that as an initiated community member I have been entrusted with, but I am not supposed to share with anyone outside of the community. That is one of the things I think the biggest challenges of, defining where that line is of, safeguarding sacred knowledge that has been entrusted to you as a member of this community, while still talking about, the people that you live with daily. There are definitely benefits and pleasures to it. Like, one of my major aims going into this kind of research was to talk about, let people, like you said, finding out about this small community,
Hmm.
and also combating certain, stereotypes and assumptions that are there about us on, in the general, like, academic or in the general public context, and really coming at it from a personal point of view was one of my major aims within this. And so that's in itself a kind of pleasure of doing this work. My position definitely gives me a lot of benefits. It's easier for like a lot of community members, especially women, to talk to me. And when we're doing interviews, we can converse in our own distinct language, which is called the Lisano Dawat, which is a mix of, Arabic and Gujarati and with Persian and Urdu terms. So my participants feel that ease in talking to me, also having, knowledge of the context of the environment, how the community operates and thinks, in many ways is definitely like a benefit to my research. And I've also worked on it, right, Greg? I've been active on Instagram, where most of my participants are, and I have like shared what I'm doing in my research, being very open about what I'm looking at, why I'm looking at it, and what I'm going to do with this information that they're giving me. So establishing that another added level of trust, of them knowing where this knowledge they're entrusting to me is going to be used. Just because the community has always been so enclosed and so closed off to protect itself, it's not even easy to trust someone who is inside their So I have worked to build that rapport and that familiarity through my public presence. And that is why you see a lot of, you see a lot of public facing work that is a way of building trust and showing the community what I'm doing
Yeah.
with this knowledge.
Yeah, especially when like you're living in Montreal and you're publishing in the Montreal Gazette. I mean, that is really great. It's like, oh, you want to get to know a little bit about what I'm releasing in the world. Here is something in a gigantic newspaper that you can check out for yourself.
One of the things that my supervisor also said was like publishing in a place like the Montreal Gazette also shows, the public outside of the community of like the different diversity within Muslim communities,
Mm-hmm.
right? And kind of honestly, with that piece, it was something that I wrote from my heart, but at the same time, it was Ramadan and a couple of Islamophobic incidents had happened in Montreal and in Canada at that moment. And I had seriously considered pulling the piece
Mm-hmm.
just to not put that kind of highlight on the community. But then I was really glad that I let it go through and it kind of got a very good reaction from lots of places.
You just mentioned Instagram, and your interest in social media was interesting too. I found an article that you wrote for LinkedIn, uh, and it's called "Making Social Media Work for You." What are some strategies that you're using regarding social media? Because we all spend countless hours of our lives using social media platforms of all kinds. I know that I definitely do. Most people do, it seems, at this age. Tell me a little bit about your use of social media for scholarship purposes.
All right, so I tell myself it's for scholarship,
Yeah.
but yeah, I waste a lot of time on there too.
Yeah.
But I find that social media is just such a fast, kind of easy method to connect with the different kind of audiences that you want to. For me, like it has been like not only to connect to other academics, but to connect to my community too, because just because it's a diasporic community, it's not exactly easy to connect in other ways. So social media was kind of like a changing point, which I also look at in my research. Because it was a site for my research, it made the most sense for me to kind of, go on there and explore it for myself too. Some of the strategies that work for me is being always very clear in what I'm using my different platforms for using, when talking about like let's say for my community, I I need to be careful of the kind of language I'm using, what kind of terms I'm using, and as someone who is a scholar of religion, I also have to be careful about what I'm talking about and the kind of concepts I'm discussing. One of the strategies is just to be very cognizant of what I'm talking about, having it more generalized, and also protecting myself by, you know, engaging to a point. I will talk to people who are respectful, who really genuinely want to discuss things that I post about versus, knowing when to just stop engaging or not replying to people. Because I have found that people will always find something to be offended about when talking about anything related to religion.
Yeah.
So that strategy has been really like primary for me when I consider posting anything on social media.
Yeah, there's a meme that I've enjoyed many times over the last few years that I think about often that says a woman comes and talks to her husband and says, "Are you coming to bed?" And he says, "No, somebody is wrong on the internet." And it's really funny. So I'm glad that you have like that you found your own balance too, because for me that's also been a struggle as we adapt these new technologies that have moved so quickly into our lives over the last several years. as a part of our day-to-day existence. It's hard to, you know, keep that in moderation and use it as a tool for good instead of something that just consumes every waking moment of our lives, because it's really easy to allow it to take over. I do want to talk about your work with Sacred Rites a little bit. So how are you enjoying your work with Sacred Rites cohort of 2023 so far?
It's been a lot of fun, honestly. So I was, before I did the sacred rights thing, I was already a Concordia public scholar. I had already we had a lot of training uh, already in, larger public scholarship work and how to engage in it. So I came to it with that kind of already training in place. So one of the things that was most beneficial for me with Sacred Rites was having that more religion focused
Mm.
kind of conversations, especially finding, more avenues to share my work, thinking more deeply about the kind of content as scholars of religion we share, and the consequences of doing public scholarship for our religion scholars. And like you said, knowing when to like stop engaging, drawing those boundaries was really helpful, was really taught to me within the sacred rites trainings, and the mentorship, obviously, from, the different mentors we had, and our cohort, which was impressive in its own way, taught me a lot of things about doing public scholarship as a scholar of religion.
Yeah. How are you finding the conversations of the other people in the cohort? Do you find that you're all learning things together and like bouncing really cool ideas off of each other as kind of like a collaborative community?
I don't think we've had a lot of opportunity, or at least I haven't, like the trainings we did, we had 1 hour uh, for each of our modules. So that was like 8 hours, and we were mostly engaged in that kind of work. And I think also because I am just too writing my dissertation these days, so I haven't really engaged that much, but I was very much enjoying, finding out the different kinds of research that people were doing and the ways they were sharing this research with the public, because all of us were at such different career stages. And so how that kind of public scholarship work evolves as you move through different careers and different life paths, and what the kind of engagement you do was very helpful for me.
What would you say are some of your goals for the future of your writing and public facing work? Where are you trying to go in the future with what you're doing?
Oh, I like that question, but I haven't given it much thought, in fact. I am definitely like continuing, my work and like sharing more of my research um, in the public sphere, because honestly, who goes and reads our articles and our dissertations?
Exactly.
Um, and like um, for me, using my dissertation to contribute like in different ways through public scholarship is the way I have of ensuring that it comes into the public record of my community, and people can actually read it and it is accessible to them. Because so that is my eventual like aim with my public scholarship, is to just, talking about the different kinds of like what I'm researching and what I'm finding out through my participants. It's that's my goal with it right now. I don't know what's going to happen once I'm done
Yeah.
with my PhD, because like I don't know if my public facing work is going to be seen positively or negatively if I decide to go into an academic career too. That's kind of up there. So at this point, honestly, I don't know. I would love to keep continuing it, but that's the thing.
I love it. Well, I think about that a lot over the last 6 years every time I talk about a book on the podcast or an article on the podcast, I'm like, a couple of thousand people that probably would have never opened that book or found that particular journal article are now going to learn a little bit about what went into that piece of writing that the author worked so hard to create. And so that's kind of like what I love to do is I just love to like put a little spotlight on pieces of writing that might not otherwise get a lot of exposure. That's kind of how I see what I do here, and I love doing it.
Yeah. So let me put that into perspective from my own point of view, right? I recently published I would say my first proper article on my research, and that was like 1 year in the writing, 2 years in the publishing, and yeah, barely I think 10 people might have read it. And then something was going on social media related to what I was talking about in my research in the Instagram circles. And I decided to kind of respond to that issue from my research. That particular 90-second video has over 22,000 likes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy how it can spread like that. And then something that, was getting no attention all of a sudden is getting tons of attention just based on, being in the right place in the right time and sticking with it and, encouraging people to check out what you're doing. I love that. So I want to know if there's anywhere people can find you, if they want to follow along with your work, or if you would like to direct anybody's attention to any particular pieces out there that you've done that you would really encourage people to go and read if they want to know a little bit about what you're doing and, follow along.
Yeah, so I am primarily found on Instagram, wasting my time. I'm doing research,
Yeah,
quotes. But yeah, I am on Instagram. My name is PhD in Arida, which is, I realize, complicated, but Arida is what like we wear. It's a community dress for the women of the community, and I've just embraced the name. I am occasionally still found on Twitter, and I have a Concordia page too, which is updated with almost everything that I write, and I've done a lot of my public scholarship work is on my Concordia page. So you can just write Arwa Hussain Concordia, and it shows up.
perfect. Well, Arwa Hussein, I have loved learning about your community, your work, your life in Montreal, your excellent commitment to public scholarship. You're doing amazing stuff. I've loved reading your articles the last couple of weeks. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today and chatting about everything you do. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me here. I had a lot of fun thinking through this and like talking about my public scholarship, because I can always talk about like my research to people, but public scholarship is sometimes people are like down on it. So it was so much fun doing this. Thank you so much.